We're going to learn how to do exposure calculations here. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we've got all the information down on our guide here. And then we can use this as we're practicing to get this ingrained in our minds as to what happens when we go from one setting to another, and a high setting or a low setting for the three different settings that we use. So first off, we're going to add in how each of these different settings affects light. And how we're going to represent that is by putting in a plus or a minus to add light in or subtract light. So for shutter speed, for example, if we are all the way over on the right-hand side, we are going to be wanting to have a minus there. So go ahead and add a minus on your sheet. That represents that we take away light the more that we go with a faster shutter speed. So on this side is a fast shutter speed, it's 1/1000. The faster we go, the more we take away light. On this side, we're going to have a plus. So we'll want to represent that as adding in light the more that we go slower on our shutter speed. Might be a good idea just to put in slow shutter, right? Or fast shutter, depending on which side we're on, because that's fast over on that side. All right, let's move down to aperture. So as we're adding in light, we would be going with a lower number because it's a bigger opening inside the lens. So we add in our plus over there. We add in our minus over on this side because it's a smaller opening with the higher numbers. It might be a good idea just to write in low number over on this side, because that's what we'll be having on that side whenever we're kind of down on that level. And then you can put high number on the other side. There we go. We'll go down to ISO now. If we are on the left-hand side, we'd be minusing away light. So that's different than the other two lines. If we're over on this side, we would be adding in light. All right. Again, we have the same information as our aperture line. So we'd want to have a low number over on this side and a high number on the other side. All right. The next thing that we're going to do on our cheat sheet here is to write out how the effects are in the picture based on the side that we're on. So to start with, we're going to put in more motion blur on the slow shutter speed side. The slower you go, the more motion blur you're going to see in your images. On the right-hand side, we're going to put in less motion blur. Moving down to aperture, it affects depth of field. So we'll want to put a shorter depth of field on the left-hand side and a longer depth of field on the right-hand side. And you've got picture examples showing right there how it looks in an image. So the flower with the top in focus, the rest all blurred out. That's a very short depth of field. Here we've got some pylons that were in the ground. There used to be a dock there. The front ones are in focus, the back ones are in focus. That's a really long depth of field. Next, we'll want to put in on the ISO line how it affects the photo. So on the left-hand side, we'll have better image quality, right? Because the lower the ISO, the better image quality we have. On the right-hand side, we have worse image quality, because the higher you go with your ISO number, the worse the image quality gets. And you've got your picture examples there, again, showing you how that looks. If you feel like you need to, you can draw in a little separation between your ISO and your aperture area because it got a little bit tight there. So we'd be using this as we're going through the ideas of exposure calculations. So let's do one together and you can see how it's done. I'd first want to have my starting settings. So I'm just going to choose red for my starting settings. let's just say that we're at 1/30 for our shutter speed. We are at f11 for our aperture. And we are all the way over at 64 for our ISO. Maybe our goal for this picture is that we want to create a shorter depth of field. A shorter depth of field would mean that our aperture number would need to go down. So ideally, we'd want to try to get to having our aperture down at the lowest number possible. So we'd like to be down at 2. That would be the shortest depth of field we could create. Our assumptions on this is that we are going to be having to try to maximize the effects. So next what we'll do is make the jumps. Each of these is a stop of light. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This would be representing 5 and 5 plus, because we're adding in light when we go towards the plus with our aperture that direction. So we need to try to minus away the same amount that we added in to keep the exposure equal. We cannot move our ISO because that's as minus as it can get for the effects on light. We can, however, move shutter speed. So let's make 5 jumps with that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be representing 5 minus. We've been able to equal out our exposure. Our main goal of getting a shorter depth of field happened. A byproduct, though, of our change was that we created a shorter or a faster shutter speed, which would result in more stop action, so less motion blur. So this would be the correct answer for this particular calculation. We have 1/1000, 2, and 64. Let's do another one quick. Let's say that our starting settings are 1, 11 again, and why don't we go all the way down to 100 on our ISO. I will give you the starting settings for a particular challenge. Here's our goal on this one. We'd like to have a picture that is stop action. So we're trying to go further up towards this less motion blur side of things. So what I'm going to do is try to move the shutter speed up as fast as it can go. So that would be all the way up to here. Let's see how many jumps we've got there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 jumps to get all the way there. That would be 10 minus. So we need to add in 10 if we're going to be able to accomplish that amount of movement. Let's see how far we can move our other settings to make that happen. So with aperture, we'd go towards the plus. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're able to get 5 from there. Our picture is still going to be way too dark. So let's see if we can add in 5 with our ISO. This direction would get us there. So going higher on the ISO number. It can go 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be 4 plus. What this is showing right now is a picture that would be overall -1. Still a little bit too dark. So what I need to do is cut back on our movement on shutter speed to make it actually work. So instead of going to 1/1000, I'll just go to 1/500, and that would result in a picture that isn't too bright or too dark. So this would be -9 instead, and that would equal things out. So our final answer would be 2 for our aperture, 1/500 for our shutter speed, and 1600 for the ISO. That's how we're going to be doing our exposure calculations. I will be giving you starting settings, and I'll give you what the goal is of the picture. See if you can make the changes on the shutter speed and aperture and ISO to make that change happen. Hope this was helpful.